Hello, my name is Sean Ernst, and I'd like to welcome you to my presentation about my investigation of the interpretation of the Storm Prediction Center's convective outlook by broadcast meteorologists and the general public. For starters, I want to talk about some Twitter thoughts that are similar to the investigation that I performed. First of all, this Twitterer mentioned on an April 2020 severe weather day that they felt that the word moderate just doesn't cut it for situations like this, and that it's too benign for the severity of the situation at hand. In response to this tweet, other Twitterers had some ideas that I thought raised some really interesting questions. First of all, this Twitterer poses the question, how do people interpret the risk indicators in the outlook, such as the order of marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, high that is in the words, as well as the color ranking that exists in the product? Furthermore, do the two main indicators, which are words and colors, help or hinder understanding of the outlook product? Additionally, how do broadcasters use the outlook to communicate risk? The public does generally receive their weather information through broadcast meteorologists, and how those broadcasters perceive and use the outlook does matter. Furthermore, does evidence from public survey data support the idea that the outlooks are confusing to the general public? This anecdotal concern has existed for a while, but I wanted to find some data to back up whether or not this concern is valid. So some key questions that I had when starting this study, I wanted to know how broadcast meteorologists, like this guy, use the SPC convective outlook in their coverage. Do they see the outlook as helping them making better decisions? Does the outlook appear to them as a useful tool to communicate risk? And what value do they generate from use of the convective outlook? Further, I really wanted to know how the general public interprets the SPC outlook. Do they interpret the different risk indicators correctly? Does their interpretation ability vary over sociodemographic factors like race and education? And do the public's interpretations and misinterpretations line up with the anecdotal evidence we see on Twitter, as well as broadcaster concerns about public interpretation? For starters, collecting data on broadcaster use of the outlook, I wanted to identify the value they generate using the outlook through the decisions that they make upon viewing a different outlook product. To do this, I used two different interview types. The first, which was mostly carried out by Dr. Cody Berry and Holly Obermeyer, was a series of cognitive task analyses, where 15 interviews with broadcast meteorologists were performed from a convenience sample from the hazardous weather testbed, where broadcasters were asked how they interpret or how they change their behavior during different level outlook days, such as no risk, moderate risk, higher risk. Secondly, I performed a series of focus group interviews with broadcasters from a convenience sample of broadcasters who volunteered to participate, where we had 4 sessions where 9 participants got a chance to talk amongst themselves to answer questions about how they would work to cover different severe weather event days based on the outlook. Finally, these were analyzed using thematic analysis, which is a method for identifying, analyzing, and reporting patterns or themes in a qualitative data set. The output from this analysis is a thematic map where a global theme is supported by organizing themes, which are further defined by basic themes that sort of describe the patterns that are seen in the data. So looking at this output, specifically first for the CTA interviews, we see the global theme of outlook value is supported by organizing themes of forecasting preparation, battle mode, and tricky to translate. Starting with forecasting preparation, broadcasters talked a lot about using the outlook as a form of situational awareness tool that they would check on waking up to make sure that they weren't surprised by anything later on in the day. They'd also use the outlook to help decide when weather would be leading the forecast, as well as to talk to their viewers about specific risks, such as showing the risk area and showing the different types of threats that they could expect on that severe weather day. As for battle mode, broadcasters talked about using the outlook to touch base with their management, as well as to decide when to arrive to work. Broadcasters on slight risk days reported getting into work 0.78 hours earlier than normal, while they reported getting into work 2.02 hours earlier than normal on high-risk days versus those no-risk days. As for increasing staffing, broadcasters mentioned that they would on average add 0.79 additional broadcasters to their staff on a slight risk day, as well as 1.79 additional broadcasters on a high or moderate risk day compared to a no risk day. Additionally, broadcasters mentioned feeling some anxiety before higher-end weather events, and that was part of their process. They might do something like taking sleeping pills before a moderate or high-risk day to make sure they were well rested and ready for the coverage. As for tricky to translate, broadcasters talked a little bit about not feeling like they often get high-risk events in their area, and that they could find the Outlook words a little bit hard to explain to their viewers. For the focus group interviews, again, the global theme was Outlook value, with organizing themes of Outlook uses and Outlook issues. For Outlook uses, broadcasters talked about using the Outlook to reach a consensus with weather models and other data input to make sure that they weren't barking up the wrong tree on their forecast. They also talked about using the Outlook to know when to ramp up their messaging in advance of a severe weather outlook, and to set staffing parameters. So if a slight risk day was occurring, they might have 1 or 2 extra people, whereas on a higher risk day, they might call everyone in. They also used the Outlook as an overview graphic for their viewers, showing the area of storms to be expected and the alert level that they could expect for that severe weather day. As for issues that the broadcasters in the focus group interviews had with the Outlook, they talked a little bit about how they found that the outlooks could sometimes bust for their areas, either too high or too low, and that sometimes their personal or local weather service forecast performed a little bit better than the SPC Outlook. They also felt that the Outlook wasn't really a public-facing product, that it wasn't designed for public use and was more designed for experts like them or emergency managers. Finally, they had a lot of trouble with explaining what the words mean. Some said that they didn't like the names, while others specified that the slight and moderate words could be better. Some tried to remedy this problem by using things like frequency words, such as scattered or isolated, as well as adding numbers, such as threat level 1, threat level 2, all the way up to 5, instead of just using the words alone. Looking at the broadcaster study overall, we found similar findings in both interview sets, specifically that outlooks do appear to have value for these broadcasters. It's a helpful forecast baseline, and it's a good trigger for coverage decisions, such as when to ramp up messaging or make sure that the station staffing knows when weather needs to lead the broadcast. It also gave broadcasters confidence to change their staffing levels in advance of a severe weather event. However, there were some issues with the Outlook. Words were considered confusing in a lot of cases, especially the words moderate and slight by these broadcasters. They felt that these words didn't really reach their audience well. They also felt that the Outlook levels can be of different significance in different regions. Considering some areas of the country have never actually received a high-risk Outlook, the moderate risk Outlook is basically their highest end kind of event, which in Oklahoma isn't necessarily the same. They also felt sometimes that their local forecast could be superior to the nationally oriented SPC Outlook. Looking at the general public, we surveyed them by asking them a series of 2 questions, where they were asked to rank from 1 being the lowest risk to 5 being the highest risk, the SPC words, which are marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and high, and the colors, which are green, yellow, orange, red, and magenta. These survey questions were asked as part of the Severe Weather and Society 2019 survey, which was a survey of U.S. residents over 18. We collected 3,006 respondents from a demographically representative sample as per the most recent completed U.S. Census. In terms of our initial findings, looking at just how participants preferred to rank the SPC words, we find that they had some issues, preferring to rank the words in order from lowest risk to highest risk: slight, marginal, moderate, enhanced, and high, when the correct order used by the SPC is marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, high. So there's definitely some issues going on in those lower end Outlook words that could be problematic in public interpretation of the Outlook. As for the colors, we find that things worked out a little bit better. Participants ranked the colors green, yellow, orange, magenta, and red. So only those top two colors on the highest end of the risk were confused, whereas the four lowest words were confused by our participants. So it seems like overall the colors are interpreted a little bit better. We also added in the participants' correctness, whether or not they correctly ranked the words and colors, and used that as a proxy to perform a logistic model analysis. So we compared the dependent variables of whether or not they were correct on the word or the color ordering to these independent variables, which ranged from age to numeracy, which is a measure of probabilistic understanding, to region, as well as their understanding of tornado watches and warnings. We found a series of significant relationships across, for word, gender, education, and numeracy, and for color, age, race, numeracy, weather salience or understanding of weather information, objective tornado watch and warning comprehension, as well as the time they spent actually answering the questions in the surveys. Looking at these relationships more closely, we find that for the SPC words, there was a positive relationship between numeracy and correctness, as well as education. Furthermore, females were more often correctly ranked the SPC words than males. So key points from this numeracy correlation is very significant, ranging from about 0.5 all the way up to about 0.616. So there's a lot more people with higher numeracy correctly ordering the SPC words. But there weren't a whole lot of significant relationships here. Looking at the colors, we see that age was negatively correlated with ability to correctly order the SPC colors, while salience, numeracy, time spent on problem were all positively related. Further, white participants were more able to correctly order the SPC colors than black or other racial group participants, and participants who could correctly tell the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning were better able to rank the colors as well. Key points here is that the numeracy correlation is even stronger in the color ranking than it is in the word ranking. And the fact that time spent on the question had a positive relationship with correctness suggests that some participants might have skipped answering this question, so there could be some issues there. The age correlation could also be explained by vision issues. As people get older, they may develop color blindness or vision issues that could preclude them from telling the different colors apart. And finally, salience and watch warning understanding may suggest both that participants who are more engaged with weather information may better understand the outlook, which makes sense. So looking at the general public study conclusions, overall, participants had a lot more trouble with the SPC words than the SPC colors. Numeracy was the most important demographic in terms of the relationship, and we found that more numerate individuals were better able to interpret the outlook. Score increased with numeracy for words and colors, and there were more significant relationships across our independent variables with color than for the word interpretation. There was also an effective time spent on color analysis and salience and watch understanding as well. Finally, the correct order of the SPC words and colors was not the most popular, with the correct color order being the second largest group of participants and the correct word order being the fourth largest group of participants. So looking at final conclusions from this study, we find that the outlook was used as a guideline and a decision aid, but it's only one of many tools that broadcasters use. Outlooks are related to broadcaster planning decisions on staffing and coverage, and the anecdotal concern over SPC outlook words is backed up by broadcaster concern and public errors in the outlook interpretation. Outlook colors generally are better interpreted by the public and don't seem to bother broadcasters as much. So I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'd really like to thank all the people listed on this slide for all the help they offered me during this project. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.